Thank you, and I'll get back to that 007 story at the end of my talk. When I was asked by the organizers of this day to come and give a talk, I was also given some pointers as to what signifies a good TED talk. Be personal, they said. Be warm, maybe a little bit humorous. But I'm Swedish. Nothing warm and humorous about that. More Bergman, hideous crime. November, eternal dusk. So we're not really funny, we're not really spontaneous, but we are passionate. And like Daniel said, I'm passionate about history. I care about history because I think it connects me to all of those that have lived before me. And by listening to their experiences, I feel that I can make better choices in the world I live in today. So I'm going to share two stories with you today from the two museum spheres that I've been working with as a historian. One is a story about success, achievement, and the other about failure. So let's start with the success story, the Nobel Prize. We've heard it mentioned several times today. It's like the ultimate recognition of the overachiever. And it's a very international history, but it's also quite local to Scandinavia, because the Nobel Prizes are given out in Stockholm and Oslo each year. And the Nobel Prizes were founded by Alfred Nobel, the inventor of dynamite, who wanted his prizes to go to those that had done something to benefit mankind. And when I was at the Nobel Museum, we prepared an exhibition to celebrate the centennial of the Nobel Prizes. Now, they lend themselves well to statistics. We heard the number of Fulbrighters that have received Nobel Prizes. Most countries also keep count, and universities. And comparisons are made. One might make the observation that during the early years, a lot of the world's talent seemed to reside in Sweden. But there is one statistic that really sticks out when you look at it, and that is that out of the 854 personal Nobel Prizes, some are given out to institutions, but out of the 853 personal prizes, only 43 women have been awarded. That's 5%. And of course, in preparing this exhibition, the question about why came up. So I put this question to the representatives of the Nobel system, and luckily they didn't respond and say, well, women can't do anything for the benefit of mankind. What they did say were two things. One, that less women had been active in the fields that are awarded with Nobel Prizes. That's physics, chemistry, and medicine in the natural science, peace activism, of course the writing of great literature, and from 1969 it was also added a prize in economic sciences. So that was the first explanation. The second was that the Nobel recognition system is very slow. It often awards people some 20, 30 years after they have achieved something. It takes time to judge if it was for the benefit of mankind. And this means, the representatives of the Nobel system said, that we will gradually see more and more female Nobel Prize winners or laureates. And I thought these arguments sounded fairly reasonable. I mean, there have been fewer women active in the natural sciences. But what about peace activism? I knew for a fact, because I'd done some research into it myself, that the early peace movement around the turn of the last century was a women's movement, because this was a political sphere that women could be active in a time when they were banned from regular politics and didn't have the vote. The writing of great novels that are widely read is certainly not an invention of the 21st century. And looking at the science prizes, there also seemed something a little bit wrong with this argument, because when I looked at the Nobel Prizes, you could see that quite a few of them have actually been given quickly after a discovery. It has been rewarded after only a few years. So that argument about fewer women and slow recognition is only part of the truth. And in fact, Alfred Nobel himself most likely thought of a woman when he added a Peace Prize to the prizes that he wanted to award, Bertha von Suttner, which he was a friend with. She eventually received the prize in 1905. Okay, so if this argument was a little bit halting, what could be learned from looking at some of the women, the 43 women, that actually received Nobel Prizes? Could they give me some sort of clue about why so few women have Nobel Prizes? So let's look at Barbara McClintock. She received the prize in medicine in 1983 for her discovery of jumping genes. And she started work in biology in the 1930s, and she did her groundbreaking work, which she was later awarded for, in the 1950s. Now, as a young scientist, Barbara McClintock chose to work in a very small and obscure area of biology. Genetics wasn't really at the forefront of biology when she started out. And this meant that she received funding, she was talented, eventually different research positions, but she couldn't get enough money to get disciples to build up a lab. She was pretty much alone in her work. When she got the prize, it was because in the 1970s, genetics suddenly came into fashion, became part of the mainstream of biological research. And so the work that she had done in the 1950s now became an example of an invention that was for the benefit of mankind. And this actually turned out to be a pattern when I looked at some of the other female Nobel laureates. The Nobel Prizes are a human endeavor, and they're of course being handed out to people that are judged by their contemporary context to do something important. And this means that certain areas of, for example, science are fashionable at certain times. But competition is very fierce for funding and awards and jobs at universities. And several studies show that women are usually at a disadvantage when they're competing with men in such areas. A study in Sweden showed, for example, that women medical researchers needed more peer-reviewed articles published to compete for the same jobs. And it's also usually been a really bad idea for women to work alongside a male colleague, because that usually means that the man is considered to be the leader of the research and the woman is the assistant. We have numerous examples from the Nobel Prize history where this has happened. Some of them are marriages, actually. So what Barbara McClintock did was a rational choice for a young researcher. She chose to work in a small area. Another person who did the same choice was Elinor Ostrom, who received the 2009 prize in economic sciences. She started out as a classical economist, but then started to venture into social anthropology, political science, economic history, and that made her, in fact, a very unlikely candidate for a prize that usually awards mathematical studies of the marketplace. So even if it's rational for a young female researcher, because it can mean the difference between devoting your life to science as opposed to not working at all, it also puts you at a disadvantage for awards such as the Nobel Prize. But maybe you're not making that choice yourself. Maybe it's being made for you by the way you're described. Nadine Gordimer received the prize in literature in 1991, and she had written great novels about heavy political issues, the social conditions, class issues, and of course relations between black and white South Africans. But when she was given the prize, it was her feminine qualities, her focus on personal relationship that was quoted. And the same is true actually for most of the 12 female laureates. They're described as great mothers, as focusing on warmth and empathy. Even Doris Lessing was very upset. She was cited to be that great epicist of the feminine experience, and she was furious because she said, I write about humans. So being typecast into this smaller, less relevant segment of achievement is something that many of these female laureates can witness of. And once I gotten this far into my studies, I stopped and I thought back to my own days as a graduate student in Stockholm in the early 90s. I was writing a dissertation on a solidly political history subject. I was looking at 3 Swedish politicians, their political theory and ideas. And I belonged to a seminar of modern history. And at the time, political history was perhaps a bit more interesting, a bit more heavyweight. Social history was considered to be, you know, people dabble in the miserable lives of the poor in the mid-1900s, whereas political history, you get to read protocols from the parliament and so forth. And I know that several of my female graduate students worked with social history, but I was firmly in this political history grounding. But the seminar became too big, so it was going to be divided, and it was said from the Department of History that many of you deal with social history, so we'll make a modern social history seminar and a political history seminar. And here is the suggested list of the 2 groups that will go to the different seminar. And on top of the list, for the social history seminar, was my name. In fact, all of the women in the seminar was transferred, or suggested to be transferred into the social history seminar. So that was an interesting reflection that this, looking at the Nobel laureates, could give me. Okay, so that was the story of success. Very briefly then, the story of a grand national failure, the one we talk about in my current museum, the Vasa Museum. Over 1 million visitors flock to our museum every year to witness this humiliating episode of Swedish history. The Vasa ship was built in 1628, and it was part of a drive by the then Swedish king to build a strong war nation, to get control of ports around the Baltic. And Sweden was poor and disorganized, but still went into building a big fleet, and the Vasa was to be kind of the jewel of the crown. So no expense was spared. The Swedish government begged, borrowed, and stole to get this ship on the way, and we imported a lot of talented shipbuilders and designers, and we cast heavy guns that we couldn't really afford and put them in an innovative way in the ship. And it sailed out in August 1628, and a lot of the people in Stockholm visited. It was on its way to Poland to wage war. So this didn't exactly go according to plan. The ship sank after 30 minutes to the malicious pleasure of some onlookers and to the great sorrow of others. And of course, this was a huge fiasco. And the king wanted those responsible to be punished, and punished hard. But they all did the clever thing and blamed the king. So in the end, no one was actually sentenced or fined or punished for this, except for one woman, actually. The widow of the shipbuilder. She went bankrupt because the crown refused to pay the outstanding bills. But the Vasa is an example which is also relevant to our time, I think, because it's a big technical project with a huge investment of money and time. So many people get involved, they all have their own agendas. No one person has complete control over the whole project. And once you get halfway, you've invested so much money that it's impossible to stop. The Vasa was actually tested for stability before she sailed out, but they had to abort the test because she swayed so much. But who was going to stop the project? So she sailed out, they hoped for the best. Looking at both our present-day history and more modern historic events, I think that we can find many such projects where large ambition and investment ends in disaster, and only after the disaster we can start looking at what went wrong. Found another ship that sank. So, what do I learn from history? Well, looking back at both stories of success and failure, I learned that people back in history, even though they have different values and even though no two sets of historic circumstances are the same, those people are people just like me and you. And if we listen to what they have to say, we might learn something that will make us better equipped to understand and act in today's society. Thank you.